let's just jump right in. So this is kind of an old, an old topic, been around. Obviously, scheduling and publications with BusinessObjects has been around for a long time. But I, of course, will, cover the basics for anybody that's just looking into it new, or, taking on more schedules and some of the things you might want to consider. So, going down that path, it's always good to get a review, even if you've been doing it for a long time. So there'll be that first. And then, of course, it makes sense for us to throw in, what's happening with scheduling of publications in 4.3, because that's what's coming. And of course, it has changed the look and feel, because that's what happened with 4.3 is we've changed the look and feel of the upfront access to everything. So, but you'll find that it's very much the same. It's just slightly different in look. And then, of course, we'll talk about taking it further. What if you don't get what you want out of scheduling of publications today, and you want to do some more things with it? So we'll talk about that. Okay, so just scheduling 101. Let's just show it in a demo, and I'm going to show it in 4.2 because most people are still on 4.2. I kind of went back and forth about whether or not I should show the newest in 4.3, but really it's the same features, just arranged differently, and I'm, like I said, going to cover that. So I'm going to show it in 4.2. And okay, so the idea for scheduling is you have a report, and you go in and you right click on it. This is and you can do it in the central management console. You have some additional features in the central management console there, or you could do it through the BI Launchpad. You don't get notifications when you do it in the BI Launchpad in the current in the 4.2, but you do in 4.3. And so you would right click on the document, even if you're in BI Launchpad as opposed to Central Management Console. I do everything from Central Management Console, so that's what I'm most familiar with. So that's what I'm going to do. All right. So you go into schedule, and you have, of course, all the different options for your schedule. So you have the ability to change the name. So if you have a name of a document that has maybe a number at the beginning because it's the identity of the document, but maybe you don't want that number there for the client that you're sending it to, all sorts of reasons to change the name of the document that's being sent out or being delivered, or what you're doing with it when you schedule it. So you can change the instance title there. Of course, you have your scheduling options next. So you have all sorts of scheduling options in terms of using a calendar. You can, do hourly. You can do daily, and the hourly is especially interesting because there are changes here with business hours for 4.3, which I'll show later as well. But there's, all sorts of options for scheduling and the time that you do it. So the schedule 4 is an ownership option. It's just whether or not you're taking ownership, or if it's you're going to set the ownership as a certain user. So it's often you'll set it as a general power user, or somebody that's not going to leave the company, because when somebody leaves the company and you delete the user, the schedule will stop. It will go to its ownership will change to the administrator account if you delete the user, and the schedule will stop. So it's a good idea to make sure that you schedule the ownership to be somebody that's going to stick around. Notification. So you've got the ability to set up some notification here because it's in the CMC. If it's in the BI Launchpad, you won't see that. But you can get notification back if you've got it enabled for if it's successful or not. You can send an email. Formats. So you've got a variety of formats. The CSV one, it's it says data here because it's the data queries themselves, and they can be combined into one document, or they can be zipped up. So that's the option on the archive is a zip of the various ones separated. Plain text. Oh, this also the archive is the actual reports output as CSV. So if you've got tables, it will actually CSV into a zip file that way. Plain text is kind of like a CSV, but it's just a text file, a TXT, and then HTML archive is a zip file, but it's got all the index HTML and the various pieces that would be delivered to an HTML location. So you can have, of course, the most common options being Microsoft Excel or Adobe Acrobat as your most common formats, but you do have that situation. Now notice in 4.2 that you have one selector. You can select one format for the schedule and no more. In 4.3, that's changed. You can actually select multiples. So that's a new addition in 4.3. Caching has become available. This is kind of more important if you are sending language translations. It starts to become more important in terms of the locales. Sometimes dates are defined by their language preference too. So like if you've got a date format that you want to deliver, you might choose a certain cache format that will deliver it in year versus month, day, or year, day, month, or the different date formats. So depending, but that's the idea. You do have some, the HTML, Excel, and Acrobat can be cached. And then we get to events. So events, there's of course notification events that you can set up that are a little bit more advanced. These are ones that would go out to users, as opposed to an email to an admin that the schedule was successful. You've got system events. This is where you're going to set up things like triggers from a data warehouse. So if you've got a data warehouse that finishes and it kicks out a file to a shared drive, and it just could be any named file, but you just set up basically BusinessObjects to look for that file. So that basically that's what triggers that the BusinessObjects schedule runs, knowing that the data has been loaded. So that's the way you make sure that the data warehouse is finished loading before you run your schedule. So those are system events, and those are set up through the events, and I've got one set up that I'm using, so I'll show that in progress. Monitoring events are just events resulting from monitoring. I guess you could use them in this case, but you usually don't. Custom events are going to be scripted. Crystal reports events are kind of the special ones where you can actually set up data to be an event. So if you basically say if revenue is greater than 20,000, then send the schedule. So it's that kind of thing, and you have to do that based on a Crystal report event. So all sorts of options, and then of course BW events coming over from SAP. All right, so and of course they can be either starts or ending kind of events. So you can either have them kick off a schedule, or in the case of system events, you can have them happen at the end of the schedule. Server groups are especially helpful for if you have large documents. You may want to isolate them to a specific server or a specific servers, like the Web Intelligence server might go with. So you might have a group of servers that you set up as a server group, and then you make certain schedules go to that server group so that they're not impeding the other schedules that are running, that are smaller schedules, but just as important. Because the processing, of course, will be higher for the ones that are huge. So that's the idea of scheduling via a server group. You may even have the server group set up for different users where they have to use a certain server group. So if you have a user that always seems to do data dumps, you can isolate them. So you can purposefully isolate them, or you can just give that as an option. Web Intelligence process settings. So that's again a processing push, whether or not it's a priority or whether or not it's set up first available kind of thing. So it's a priority sort of setting. Destinations. We have, of course, the BI inbox, and now you have limits on the BI inbox. You have for a while, but if you didn't have them set before, which many environments don't have limits set on their inboxes because they came from the old business objects arena, they didn't, or time period, they may not have made that addition. So in 4.2, I think it's SP3 or something like that, inboxes became, limits on inboxes became available, and that's highly recommended. Of course, having a bunch of schedules that are out in your repository slows down your repository. The bigger your repository is, the slower it is. It's like, kind of goes with the territory. So definitely a good idea to set limits on your inboxes. Plus, for me as a consultant, I appreciate it because it's less to move over, to migrate over from one server to another. So when it comes to migration time, you'll have wanted those limits set. And then the way that, well, we're going to get to limits next, so I'll get to limits in a second. But anyway, so you can go to the inboxes of users. So you can define it to go to emails. You can go FTP server and SFTP server, and you can go to the file system on a file share or something like that. So you have different destinations. The SFTP server destination is fairly new. I want to say maybe SP6, but anyway, it is available. This is one of the things that changed. There was the addition of this scheduled content contains data delivery rule that was added in fairly recently. So previously, it always would be scheduled and sent out, even if it didn't have data. And of course, users that didn't get any data wondered if there was something wrong with the document. So this is a good way to reduce the amount of tickets that you get from users that say, there's no data in this document. What happened? When there actually was no data. So, if somebody was gone on vacation and they didn't do any sales, then there probably wouldn't be any rows of data in their sales report. So, so you can set up delivery rules for that.
Okay, so Amy, there was a question
Yeah.
that came in. Is it possible to remove some of these options from the schedule list so that users don't actually see them? Things like the caching events, the scheduling server group, the web intelligence processing setup. Can it be customized?
So there is a customization area under the users and groups. I don't know what I had off the top of my head. I don't know. Let me just check for a second. What can be removed there. So if you just go to a user group, let me just grab a user group and I go to customization. There are various features that you can remove. This web intelligence, though, I don't know if it's going to be scheduling. I don't see scheduling on here. So don't see that. Definitely the BI, if I go to BI, I've been playing with admin tools. And I try to schedule as a user in BI. This is why I have these open up front because my VM is on my machine, so it's a little slow. Okay, so let's say let's go to the document as a user, and I go to schedule. So you won't see everything. So as a user, you're seeing, for the demo, I want to show everything that you have available to you. But in terms of an end user, you have the time, you have the formats, you do have the caching here, and the events available to you, and the server group, which is good because you want them to be able to choose a server group usually if there's a server group that you want them to go to. So you don't have everything. I mean, the main thing is notifications, but I'm not aware. I can take that offline and see if I can find. Yeah, not aware of being able to take that out. Okay, any other questions?
Not right now.
All right. I'm moving right along because we're going to do publications too, and that's a big one as well. Okay, so where was I? I need to go back to folders. And my document that I'm kind of showing. Okay, so limits. Let me get this out of the way. Okay. So limits are the number of instances. If you do a right click on a document, of course, you have limits. Of course, it would be recommended that you do everything on folder level as much as possible in terms of best practice. So you can do it on folder or you can do it on document. But the idea behind limits, and again, you can do them on favorites folders, you can do them on personal folders, you can do them on inboxes. And it's recommended to do them in all three of those. So highly recommended that you set some sort of limit. But you can basically set it based on time or based on number. And you can set it by group. So you can do it overall, or you can do it by group. And each of these, this one says the number of days, so that's the time concept, or the number total. So this would be per object. And you can do it by user or by group. So basically you're saying that for all the reports in this, you can keep 10 schedules or 10 instances, I should say. So the historical keeping, each time it runs daily, you have a historical version of the document for each day for 10 days. And then when the 11th day happens, the 10th day drops off. So as soon as you kick up a new one, the other one drops off, and it only drops off when when the one replaces it, basically. So that's the timing of how it kicks the one out. So it only keeps so many. So that's if you're doing the number, and of course if you're doing the days, then you're saying, if it's 2 years old, I don't really need it anymore. And a lot of that is more financial based. So you're going to have limits based on if your finances need to keep 5 years of data or 3 years of data, then you might have many days. But if you're, if you got other kinds of documents, you may only want to keep, even 10 days, just keep the recent versions of it. So just depends on what your need is. So again, you can do that per document or per folder, and you can do it by user or by group, and you can do it by time or by number.
A couple more questions, Amy.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier about if a user leaves, all their reports go to the administrator by default.
In the public folders.
In the public folders, okay. So is there any way to distinguish these ones from reports that have been migrated by the administrator?
I'm not sure I understand the question. If
Well,
they've been migrated,
I'm talking about the schedules, right? So when the user leaves, all their associated reports and schedules, right, default to the administrator, right? Okay, so Joe Blow leaves, and now all of his reports are going to default now to the administrator.
Right.
Okay, so if how do they end up there? I mean, does he just then take them over and allocate them to other people if he wishes at that point, or they have to run under the administrator user at that point? Right,
you have the option. There's some options. There's some script options, and there's some other options that you can set the ownership. We've done ownerships by script and reset them before, but yeah, it basically, usually we just run them under the administrator account. We just restart them under the administrator account, but because the idea is to get them going, right? The delivery is what matters. But if ownership does matter to the, because you've got security settings based on owner or something like that, if ownership does matter, there's ways of setting the owner back to a certain user. Like if one person leaves and then gets replaced by another person, then you might want to put the ownership under the replacement person.
Okay, but in most cases, what if the administrator was proactive and he had already migrated some of those to other people, then they're not going to end up back defaulting to administrator, because now they're going to also be under that other person as well, right?
I'm turned around on the question. So yeah, the administrator there, I mean, like I said, there's scripting that you could do to change the ownership if they want to be proactive on it. I don't know of anything within the screen.
Okay. And then
I don't know if I'm answering that question.
no, I think you did. I think you did.
Okay.
Is there a means to filter users without going to dynamic publications? For instance, only select reports to users who interacted with the system in the last 24 hours.
Ah, that's a good question. There isn't a dynamic way of doing that. That would be an SDK option. That would be an interesting option. I like the way you think. Is what I would say, because I kind of like that idea. But not that there isn't a within the tool like way for now.
Okay.
That I know.
Is it possible?
Go ahead. I was going to say there is a there's post-publishing stuff that you can put a script in. So yeah, but yeah. Anyway, I don't where you could maybe stop something from going. Like it would normally go to 10 people, but if of those 10 people, only 5 people logged in, you could probably, it would probably still create the 10 documents, but it would only send to 5 if with a post-process script, that's possible. But there, yeah, in general, you're talking about scripting.
Right. Is it possible to select multiple documents and allow them to all have the same schedules?
Is it possible to set multiple documents and all have the same schedules? No. It is possible to set, I'm going to say, I mean, you can set up standard notifications, but that's about it. No, you can't do a bulk schedule that way. You can, in the newer version, in the 4.3, you can well, I mean, you can do publications. Okay, so what you would do is you do publications. If you're doing multiple documents, a publication can allow you to put multiple documents into a group set of documents to send out. A schedule is just one document. That's not what your question is, though. Can you say your question again? I'm just, I'm thinking as you're saying it.
Well, is it possible to select multiple documents and allow them to all have the same schedules?
So, no, not in terms of scheduling. You can't do a bulk schedule that way. You have to do one schedule at a time. To my knowledge, I've never tried actually. And that's good. I mean, it's a good, interesting try. Let me just double check that I can't select multiples. Let's see if I've got multiples in here, and I right click, yeah, I don't have schedule on the options. So you can't do it that way, but with publications, which I'll show you, you can select source documents and then you can publish them as a group. Yeah, so that would be under one schedule.
Yeah, I think you can do it with publications. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So it would be a different method. It wouldn't be a bulk capture and then right click schedule, but we're going to get to schedule. We're going to get to publications. So you'll see that then. Good question. See, that's what I'm always worried about is all the questions. All right. So I think we've kind of covered schedules and I've covered limits. So we've covered the concept behind limits. And again, super recommended that you look into adding limits to all of your areas. So let's talk about publications. And again, we're just going to do this in the demo. So I've got an example here, but basically if you're going to create a publication, you right click and you do new publication. And it's the same, I don't know if you can set publications here. New Yeah, you can do publications. Same thing in BI tool for people. So it looks like there aren't a lot of options. There are, the other options come about once you, oops, set a title, and then you see here you can add, so I could go to one of mine that has multiples. You can add multiple documents to a single publication. And then so once you've added the source document, then you get the rest of the steps. So I'm going to go back to the one that I already have because it's already set up. But that's the idea on creating a publication. One word of caution on publications: when you start doing publications, when you go down the road of publications, you do need a lot more in terms of CPU power, in terms of memory power. So it's a big drag on the system. So you definitely want to consider that at a point when you've got hefty CPU options. So just one word of caution on that. Just because it takes not just the processing of the report, but you have personalization, which we're going to get to, and the ability to do a lot of different deliveries, and so those deliveries end up taking more processing power. Anyway, okay, so when you get to publications, so let's take a look at this. So to edit it, I just go into properties, and you can see I've got a bunch of options here. So I'm just going to go down the list. So general properties, of course, same concept. You give it a title. That's just the name of the publication. Then the source documents, you can set up multiple source documents. Some of them you can set to refresh at runtime, and others you might not. For instance, if you're going to use a document to create the HTML code of the email, the HTML behind the email, you might do that as it's not a refreshable thing. It's just using the WebI document format as your HTML for the email. So there's some tricks to be done with documents that you wouldn't refresh at runtime that can come from a WebI, and so it's not in stone that you would always refresh everything. But if you're doing multiple documents sent out as the same schedule, obviously you'd want to refresh them. Then you have two options. You have enterprise recipients or dynamic recipients. And I put these out at the same time because they're kind of a one or the other, although you can, I think, do them both. Enterprise is the internal users, so the people that are part of your repository, your BusinessObjects repository. So you've got users in your BusinessObjects repository, you can send to them, and you can send to them, to their inboxes and so forth. So very commonly in an internal environment, that is what you will use, and that's the easiest to use. Dynamic recipients, on the other hand, is for sending it out to external emails, for example. So you actually have to give it a document that has the WebI document that has the user, their email, and maybe a personalization setting. I'm going to get to personalization in a second, but the idea being that you have to tell them, which user belongs to which email, and then you select those users that you want to send to. So that's what dynamic recipients is. It's slightly different, and I'm not going to demo that, but that's what you would use that for. And you do have to create a WebI document to provide that dynamic list. Usually we'll do an Excel document and then make the WebI document from Excel data source. Okay, so enterprise recipients, you can set a group, and then you can actually exclude users from that group. So just to note that that's also possible there, but you can also do it by user, either one. All right, so the big one, personalization. So personalization is where you are saying when the sales manager in Arizona gets the data, they're getting only Arizona data. Even though you're in your database, you have Arizona, Oregon, New York, Florida. Okay, so that the idea is you're filtering the data for the user. That's the idea behind personalization. And personalization can be done at either the global level or the local profile level. And if you're dealing with SAP, SAP has its own profiling. So you may, depending on the data that you're sending, you may be able to just use, or may not even be able, but you should use that profiling directly through SAP. So if you're using SAP data, there's a whole nother ballgame in this area. But I've just set up a personalization local profile for the client type. So I'm basically saying when you're sending these out, whoever you're sending it to, send it to their appropriate client type. In this case, I have to set up their appropriate client type in the CMC. So I'm going to leave this screen and show you where you set that. And this is one of the frustrations that a lot of people have. I'm not the only one, but in general, it's frustrating that that personalization requires that you set up profiles, and that the profiles are in a different area entirely. But if you think about it, your profile is usually set once, like you're a salesperson from Arizona, and you can apply that profile to, personalize 20 different reports for Arizona data. So it's not out of the realm of, possibility, but it is kind of frustrating that it is in a separate place. So you do have to sometimes, if you're a BI person, just an end user using the BI Launchpad, and you're trying to do personalization, you may have to ask your administrator or whoever has access to the CMC to go into profiles, because you won't have profiles available to you. You have to ask them to do it if they aren't already there. So profiles, and you go in and you create a profile. I've got one already set for client type, and that's just what I've named it. So let's go in and take a look at that. The basic piece of profiles is that you set a target object. So an object in the universe. So here's my universe. I've got the client type object in the client class. So it's client, that's how it's set out. And then you specify for that client type object, what is the value or what is the filter that you're going to do. So in this case, it would be Arizona, right? We were talking about a salesperson from that is the Arizona person, or it would be Florida is the value. So in this case, I've got the administrator. I've set them up with a filter expression for the value new. So I just went in, and you've got formula editor, and you don't have a whole lot of options. You have just the normal operators. So it's not a full formula editor, but it is does allow you to do like betweens and things like that. But you can do you can select values, or you can do an equal to and just select one value. So that's the options there. And then for the other user value here, I just went in and did it directly on the values list. So this would be only an equal to or an in list option, whereas this one has things like the betweens and those kinds of options. So I would just enter the value I entered in new. So now it means that for A. O'Neill, she's going to get I'm going to get the value filtered on new, and administrator, same thing. They're going to get the value filtered on new. And this specific report has both repeat and new. So if you look at the results, I've already run the results because we run out of time on these things. I've sent them to their inboxes. So if I go to inbox, and if I look at A. O'Neill, I ran it first one time through without any personalization. So I ran it for a bunch of different formats. So here's my PDF, and you'll notice that the data is client type, repeat, and new. But then I ran it with the personalization set. So you can see the personalization is set. And if you look at results here, the results are filtered down to just the new rows. So that's, again, the idea is you're filtering the rows. So yeah, so that's the concept there. Same thing with the administrator would have their versions in their inbox or whatever that's filtered. So that's how personalization works. You got to be a little careful with personalization. It's really something you'll want to test out, because there are various things that affect personalization. For instance, if you've got multiple data providers and you've got one data provider providing new and repeat, and that's not prompted, but it's providing all those values, and then you filter on new, you might only get the new rows filtered from the one query, but not the other query. So, there's lots of testing involved in that. If you've got filter bar, it doesn't work with the filter bar. You have to make sure you remove the filter bar from a report in order for you to get the filters applied. So there's a few sort of known instances, known issues, and they will get all the results. And so that could be, you want to be aware that it's not used, personalization is not to be used for security. It's not recommended, it's not best practice to use it for security. So if your salesperson who's in Arizona is not supposed to see anything from Florida, don't use personalization. Use something like a row level security in the data, at the database level or at the universe level. So those are the kinds of things that you want to keep in mind, that personalization is really meant to be a convenience. It's not meant to be a security. People use it for security, but there's enough of a situation where they could potentially get all values that you don't want to use it for security. But let's go back to our publications. That's my soapbox for that. So we've got personalization. Their formats are slightly different. So I do want to point out the formats. So notice that you can do multiple kinds of formats in 4.2. You can on the scheduling, but you could in the publication. So you can set a bulk of different formats of the report and publications. And notice also that you have MHTML here in the publication, which you didn't have as one of the format types. So that's an addition as well. So that's helpful for inline HTML or inline email formatting. Makes your emails have more interest if you're sending emails out. Destinations, same destinations, not a whole lot different. You do have that package as zip file, even if it's going to different destinations. That's because if you consider that you have the possibility of multiple formats, you could potentially package them. If you have a prompt on the document, then you can modify the prompts here, and they will be set for that schedule. So you have to do that basically, or the schedule will fail. Or the schedule of the publication, I should say, will fail. So that's for both schedules and publications. I don't know that I showed that before. Delivery rules, same concept. You have the always deliver or deliver on data with data or not. There's also the fully refresh. That's a nice feature as well. Post-publication extensions, you have some, you also have before publication delivery scripts. So potentially you could do, I didn't think about this. I've done them on the after. I've done scripts for after, but yeah, you could potentially do that question about whether or not I could just do the users that were, the users that had logged in, recently. Potentially you could do some sort of extension there. I've only done the post ones, but in my experience, but potentially you could do that. Your recurrence options are the same. Notifications options are the same. You can use events to trigger, just as before. You can specify server groups, and then you have advanced. So you have under the advanced, because you have the ability to personalize, you can decide whether or not it's you refresh the report and then you filter the single refresh, or you can, which we call burst, or you can decide whether or not you're going to refresh it individually for each value. If you're connecting to SAP profiles, if you're connecting to SAP data and SAP is set up with the profiles, it has to be a single refresh for each user. So you don't have the option of one refresh and then filter for the SAP one. Just keep that in mind if you're doing that. So you have those kinds of options deciding. Of course, a single refresh that you filter is usually more performant because you're using the database, once and then you're siphoning off, and you're refreshing once and then you're siphoning off. But keep in mind that the processing of siphoning it off is a heavy process load. So again, when you get into the publication world, you're going to want to increase your CPU. It's going to matter. Categories, etc. The rest of it's all the same. So, and then you can schedule it specifically, similarly to before. So that's publications. Any questions about that? I think I've covered everything on that. The one thing I wanted to show on publications that I didn't show is the triggering from data warehouse, because that is, I've actually got it set up to trigger from a file. So if I go to system events, I've got a file found event. So I just added in a, not notification, I added in an event, and then that event is just set to look for, based on the event server, look for the specific file in a specific location. And so I've set that up so that the data warehouse, when the data warehouse is done loading, it pumps out that file. And so this schedule will be in pending mode until that file shows up. So we're still doing okay on time, so I'll go ahead and show that. If I go back to folders, application, let me make sure that folder doesn't have it. So I've got that in the folder now, so I'm going to delete that. Okay, so I've got nothing, the file does not exist at this time. So if I, and I've gone in to this under the schedule, did I already do it? And under events, I've got it looking for the file not found event. So it's gone, I went under system, found the file not found, and I moved it over so that it's looking to wait for that. Okay. So if I run now, and I go into the history, I see it in pending, and it'll stay in pending until that file appears. So that's how that works. So if I then copy that file over into this where it's expecting to find it, which could be a shared drive, most likely it's a shared drive and not the C drive. Then if I'm just going to refresh the screen, this is not a refresh of the document, this is just a refresh the screen. And it is in running mode. So it triggers based on that event. Okay, that's the most common event that people use, although they also use the Crystal Reports data, but I don't see that very often. I see the data warehouse trigger. Okay, back to our PowerPoint. So what's different in 4.3? Everybody wants to know what's happening in 4.3. The main thing is that it's just changed the look and feel. So instead of all those different selections on the left, you have just 2 tabs, and you scroll down to get to each of the sections that apply to each of the pieces that you normally would select on the left side. So that's the big difference in terms of look and feel, is you've got the different tabs. Then you also have the ability to select multiple destinations in the 4.3, and you have what we call business hours for the hourly option. So I'm going to show, I think I have a picture of that. Yeah, right here. So if you go into scheduled instances and you toggle it to, oops, that's not the one I want. That's this one. I think my next slides have these. So I'll get back to these on the next slides in just a second. So then the next item here is there's also new in 4.3, this calendar view of the instance manager, and it's available from the BI Launchpad. So previously we would give, or in 4.2, we would often give users access to the instance manager in the CMC in order to be able to see their instances, or handle their manage their instances. You now have that in the BI Launchpad. So you can go into scheduled instances from the tile here, and then you have up in the right corner, you have a little toggle button, which is not very dark in this picture, but if I clicked on that tile button, it would switch over to calendar mode. And the nice thing about that is that in that calendar mode, you can see when everything is going to run in calendar mode, and so it helps to decide, to kind of space things out. Of course, you wouldn't want everything running at 7 a.m. if you can help it, because then you're going to get overloaded at 7 a.m. So you want to kind of space things out if you can help it, and that helps you do that. So that's a nice feature. Okay, so on the general tab, the 2 tabs, like I said, in 4.3, you have the instance title, the destination. So all the same things that you had, over on the left side, you just have them as a scroll down option, because everything is touch sensitive to, for mobile use kind of thing, for an iPad or whatever. So you've got the scroll down options instead. And you have notifications available to the BI Launchpad users. And then the multiple destinations option, so you can actually send for BI Launchpad users, you can send to multiple destinations, which wasn't available in 4.2 for BI Launchpad people. And then there's the business hours. So the business hours, if you changed it to happen, you want to send something hourly, you might only want to send it hourly during business hours. And then when people go home, why use, you're going to be restarting the database or doing backups or stuff, all sorts of stuff. So, so it makes sense that you would set your business hours and you'd only have that hourly report running during those business hours. That's really nice for dashboards that are going through BusinessObjects dashboards that you're displaying during business hours. You're not wanting to necessarily display and refresh them overnight. So it's a common thing. And then notifications being available for the BI Launchpad people, which is good, not just for administrators. Then the other tab, like I said, there's 2 tabs in 4.3. So the other tab has the things that are specific to reports. Notice that's a lot less. So it has the prompts. If you have prompts on the report and you have to set them, it has those options. It has the formats that you're going to send the report out as, and the delivery rules. The formats, the MHTML is not available in publications, I think. So that one's, I'm not sure what the plan is on that one. But the rest of the formats are there as expected. So see that in 4.3. So same concept in publishing for 4.3 is you've got 2 tabs, but instead of it being general and report tab, you have a general and a summary tab. On the general, you have most of the general pieces just like you had before. There's current issues with personalization based on profiles. There's some knowledge-based things that are being looked at for profiling and personalizations in publications in 4.3 right now. So that's kind of a in process of being fixed. So there's various fixes happening. Speaking of fixing, what you'll find if you've been doing a lot of knowledge-based searches, which I'm always doing, is that there's already fixes that are being noted out there in the knowledge-based arena for 4.3 SP2, which, given that 4.3 SP2 isn't out yet, is interesting to me. They're already noted, they're keeping track of them in their knowledge-based articles. So periodically I'll come across one that says, this is fixed, but SP2 isn't available yet. So there's a link over here to go download the document, but it's not there. The link is just to the downloads area. So we'll see. That's expected in December of 2021. Even the top restrictions are not yet posted. All the different restrictions aren't posted, probably because they're fixing some things and they may not get to all of them. So they're going to put the restrictions based on what they don't fix. So we'll more to come on that. As we find out, we'll let you know. Things to keep in mind with 4.3, even though we're done with the basic things of showing you scheduling of publications, but things to keep in mind in regards to just overall that will affect, of course, your scheduling. So the Crystal Reports is going through a deprecation piece. So and in SP2, in 4.3 SP2, they're actually not just deprecating it the way that they deprecate usually. Usually it means it's still available, but we're not doing anything for it. That's the case with UDT. But with Crystal Reports, it's actually that are on Linux, the servers that are on Linux, those are going away in SP2. So you'd either want the earlier version of 4.3 or want to stay on 4.2, and SAP has said that they will continue support longer if you specifically say for your 4.2 environment, if you specifically say you're on Linux Crystal user, and you have to put in a request for that extended support, but you can. There is a knowledge base article that's specific to the statement of direction for Crystal Reports support, and it has changed, so it's a good thing to keep an eye out for if you're a Crystal environment. Also, that's just for Linux and Unix. So another option, of course, is to go to Windows servers. And if you're not, if you're on Windows servers, you're okay. So, all right. So, lastly, of course, there's lots of times you might want to take this further, and of course, we offer that. So Infosol, lots of information about our third-party tool, InfoBurst, which uses, of course, the SDK and within BusinessObjects for scheduling and publication, and couples that SDK with many other APIs that are out there. So we have done the work, and we have a really good team that does the work, I gotta say, and I'm totally being honest about that. The people that code that are like crazy good. But the integration with other APIs, we have TABLEAU, SharePoint, POWERBI, Excel. So if you're looking to push out to, TABLEAU, or looking to push out to POWERBI from universes, you've got all this data and structure and all this time and effort put into creating universes. Fantastic use to just push out to some of these other tools. Also, same thing with Webby. If you think about, you've got two different data sources and you can merge them in a Webby table and Webby document. I mean, you can use Webby as your data source and then schedule it to TABLEAU or POWERBI, or So there's lots of more options in InfoBurst, and obviously in 30 minutes I'm not going to cover that all, but there's lots of options. In addition to that, of course, we've included lots of different bursting options. We have things like post-processing Excel. I mean, we have there's just a lot of different options that come into play. It's intuitive. Everything's kind of together. We've revised the layout and even got design people involved to help with that, to make it very user-friendly and intuitive. And then, as I mentioned, if you get down the publishing path with BusinessObjects, you really need to add CPU. So you're in a situation where you have to beef up your server, and there is a lot to be said for sort of offloading that onto a different server and having something like InfoBurst do that work for you. So, sometimes it's good to have things be separate, and but not only have their extra features, but also be on a different server. So anyway, something to think about, and this is kind of an architecture along those lines. And we've got workflows that are new with InfoBurst that make things really easy to do. So if you have a specific thing you want to do, you just click on the workflow and it walks you through it. It's like a wizard. So there is going to be a SpeakBO webinar coming up on that. And I'm sure somebody else is going to talk about that. But that is going to be done by Rajesh. So coming soon. It's going to walk you through some of those workflows. And specifically a lot of changes being done for Power BI workflows. So, so that's it. Thank you.